as leaders, we're constantly challenging people's thinking and their perspectives. Our thoughts lead to our emotions, that lead to our actions, that lead to our results. In order to build a strong culture, we have to do that internally first.
Hey, welcome back to Culture is an Inside Job. We're here with Karen Benoit Preston and our good friend, Wendy Roop. Hey, Wendy, today it's all about Wendy Day.
This is weird.
Hey.
No, we're excited. I think it's important. We spent a lot of time talking about, where Karen came from and her background. And I think it's important for the listeners to understand, your background and, where you are today. And the really cool parts is, how'd you get to where you're sitting right this very spot? So I'm going to turn it over to my good friend Karen. She's going to ask you some questions, and I'm going to do my best to interrupt and jump in.
Woohoo.
Thanks. It's fun to be here with you all too, by the way.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So, hey, would you be willing to kind of share with us a little bit about what your story? What is your story? What's your story, girl?
It's a big question. Well, I was born in Hinesville, Georgia. I didn't live there long. I only lived there the first 9 months of my life, but
You're not a dog, are you?
not a dog. Mm-mm.
Okay.
I'm a
If
Georgia peach, as my grandma used to call me.
There you go. That's a lot
Mhm.
better than a dog.
Georgia peach. Yeah, I and then have been in Ohio ever since then. And I mean, how much do you want to know?
Oh,
But
I know. You just dive in.
um,
What story do we want to know?
yeah.
What do you want us to know?
Well, I want you to know that I have an amazing family. And family is so important to me, and I'm probably going to get choked up in all of this, but anyway, I was just blessed to be born to my parents, Dick and Pat Smith, and I have two amazing brothers, Todd and Chad. And I was very fortunate that family was also very important to my mom and dad, and they didn't have like, so there my dad's parents lived in Cleveland, my mom's parents lived in some different places but ended up in Florida, so we didn't have a lot of family close to us. Um so just that family unit, but even our like cousins who we didn't get to see all the time, like it was important to them that we knew them, and even though we didn't get to see them a lot, when we did, it was like yesterday, because I think we all kind of have that within us, that you make time for family, you build relationships with family. And just growing up, I was really fortunate that my brothers and I were just super close. I'm the oldest of the two of them, so Todd's a couple years younger than me, and Chad's 8 years younger, so he's a little baby. So we still tease him about being the baby. Um, but I think that typical, I know it's not always typical, I should be careful with that. But like for me, being the oldest, I did find myself feeling like, I had to be the responsible one. And, I was very, and still am, protective of my brothers. And, but we were super close. And, my mom was just very, you've both met my mom. Um,
Love me some Pat.
she is she is really literally my angel on earth. But she was just really supportive of my dad. And so my dad was a corporate guy, I mean family guy too, but very super smart. And my mom just was, she worked as a lab technician, so she definitely, worked as well, but most of her career she was part-time, so she was able to also, be a part of our lives. And even in that, my dad was great about being at all of our events and so forth. And so went on vacations, and just, when I hear about people's stories growing up, I just am like, how did I get so lucky? And um, nobody's perfect. And so I think as I've gotten older, I, just realize the things that I didn't recognize in the moment that um were normal to me. But as I look back and I picked some of those things up, now I'm like, well, no wonder. And part of it is, my dad was Although he was loving and I never questioned his love for us, he was very direct. He was very traditional, um, extremely hard worker. His work ethic, if I can talk, was just so important. And, I think all of us picked that up. My dad had his parents. His dad was an alcoholic. He ended up being a recovered alcoholic, but so he went through his childhood, living in that environment, and having a mom that, back then they didn't have as many choices, right? So she just, did what she needed to do, as a mom. And my dad ended up, the stories that our parents or our grandparents tell us, like, I walked uphill both ways, to school and so forth. But
No shoes
so,
in the snow.
right, right. And so of course, heard some of those things, but the reality of it is that my dad was the oldest of their family, and he did work a few jobs, helping to support the family, not just him. And he didn't have anyone in his family saying, "Hey, go to college," or do this. So he did all that on his own. He put himself through Miami University in Oxford, and graduated there, and was drafted after he got out of college. And that's how I ended up being born in Hinesville. He and mom, got married and moved there. Um, and then after that came back to Troy and worked for, in corporate America. And in, uh, his career, he ended up being the director of benefits and compensation benefits for, used to be Hobart Corporation in Troy. Um, anyway, and
I
so,
did not know that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Is that where you had like you got a little bit of passion for HR?
I think so, and there's a whole story there too. I don't know that I ever really knew what I wanted to do for sure, for, with regards to that kind of job that I ended up in. Um being that my dad was really traditional, um he would take us to work with him sometimes. I would help him put together the benefits books. And, so I was around that, enough to, to kind of get a taste of it. Um, but if I'm honest, like what I really thought I wanted to do when I was little was, like I wanted to be a singer. I mean, I went through the whole thing of I want to be a teacher or I want to be, but like when I remember this time when I was like, you know what I want to do? I want to be a singer. And I don't know, I was probably 10 years old or something.
Well,
And
let's give us a little.
Oh, yeah.
oh
Yeah,
no,
girl.
no,
Yeah.
we just do that at the
No, hey,
No, no, yeah.
let's just see if we missed our calling. I
She
mean, we're
totally
just
missed her
kidding.
calling, Scott. I'm
100%.
totally a witness to this.
Yeah. I just need you to just pretend like you're on American Idol and
Mm-hmm.
just one
Yeah.
short. So, having two brothers, you had to have a nickname. You had to have one. Did they give you one?
my brothers know, but my dad especially, but my nickname is Peanut.
Oh, well, that
I was
makes
only I was
sense.
only 5 pounds when I was, born. I never made it much bigger,
Gonna say,
but
aren't you still only about 5 pounds?
but but yeah, so that's my nickname is Peanut for sure. But but yeah, I mean, I really did have a passion. I actually used to be in a lot of plays, and I was a dancer, and I was, love to get on stage in front of people. I used to pretend we had a fireplace at home with a low mantle. And I remember it had a screen on it, and the little things that you pull to open the screen or whatever. I remember getting on there and using that and pretending that was a microphone, singing in my house. And but my dad was so traditional, and he cared so much about, and he worked so hard to get where he was, that that was scary for him, right? Because that isn't something that he could envision, that, well, gosh, are you going to be able to make it doing something like that? And two, like that's not traditional. And are you going to be able to build a life on that?
There
And
was no American Idol back then.
right, and there was no American Idol back. And so so because I knew, it's just so funny how we put so much, so many of us think so much of our parents that, I didn't want to disappoint him. And so my idea of anything like that that wasn't traditional was like, okay, I better, better not even think of that. And so for a while, I thought I wanted to be a pediatrician until I was about a junior in high school and I took chemistry and said, never mind. Like I love biology, but not chemistry. So, um, and, wasn't the best in math and things like that. So, kind of had that mindset that, well, that's probably not the route that I should go. But anyway, so then finally when I was getting ready to go off to college, the way I ended up doing getting into what I did, so I studied organizational communication, Wright State University, shout out. But anyway, um, and, before that, when I wasn't sure, our family doctor, who was also really good friends with us, was over at our house, my mom and dad's house with us one day. And I had just graduated from high school and we were talking about what I should do. And I had written something. And he was like, you need to do something with communication or something like that. And so I just held on to that. I was like, well, somebody like could actually call out what they thought. Not that my mom and dad didn't say great things about me, but as far as what I was going to do with my life, sometimes we hear that in somebody else. And so that's how I ended up going into organizational communication at Wright State, and then ended up getting into after I graduated, I got a job with Dayton Power and Light, on the west side of Dayton, which for me, coming from where I came from, was just a really big deal. And I got to supervise a group of meter readers, and it was one of the coolest experiences I've ever had. And so then fast forward, I got the opportunity the way I got into human resources was my dad knew a consultant um, who worked, did some HR work with different organizations. And there was an organization where at the time, I think she was still called like personnel or something like that, or what have you, but their manager was getting ready to go on some sort of medical leave. And so she was like, hey, do you want to try this? And so I knew I was ready to leave where I was. So I took the chance and said yes. So very quickly, I had to learn how to do like payroll, and I had to learn how to be the person where some people were coming to about all their HR issues. And I did that for about 3 months. And then after that, ended up landing, doing some recruiting for a place called Palmer Plastics. And that's where I landed for about 7 years, where I ended up being responsible for all of their human resources by the time that I left, for several of their locations, doing all aspects of HR. And I still have some good friends, from there, and just absolutely fell in love with it. And then when it was time to go from there, I got some experience in financial services and human resources, um, and then healthcare. And I ended up at Mago and Brabender, which was absolutely amazing. And so talking about how did I get out of HR, getting closer to where I am now, is I when when I was at EBS Asset Management, which is also an amazing organization, we went through, it was during that time where we ended up having to go through several reductions in force. And so, I was responsible for that strategy. And I was like, you don't need me anymore with this many people. And so I exited, and McGowan and Brabender, we were connected to them. And so I had a conversation with them, and I ended up joining them more from a culture perspective versus what I was doing. And so took a chance in leaving HR, and it started out like they were like, can you be responsible for like the technical side of training? I'm like, I'll do it to get in here, but just so you know, that is not my sweet spot, as you two know. And so, this is where, I got the opportunity to start working with Scott so closely, and the company as a whole gave me the opportunity to step into things that I never got to do before, managing their customer care team, managing their small business team. And I'm like, what? Like, I've never done this, but it was just because I had experience with teams and so forth, I was like, okay, I can see how this makes sense. And finally, I think I went to Scott one day and I was like, listen, I just want to be responsible for all of your internal education and development. Can I do that? And they were like, yeah, why not? So then I started getting to do that and being responsible for their leadership university. And then I got the amazing opportunity to get my coaching certification in 2015, and Scott and MB supported me in that. And in that journey, as much as I loved MB, those of us who have gone through a program like that know that it's life-changing. And I knew that I was called to something. I was very comfortable there, and I loved the people and I loved the culture, but I knew I was called to step out. And so I did. And to make a long story short, that's when I ended up as an executive coach internally at CareSource. And I got to do that for 5 years. And then in 2021 is when I got to step out again and start my own coaching practice. And so that's where I'm at now. So all of that, all those years, 54 years within that number of minutes I just shared with you. And of course,
Hey,
there's a lot of stuff in between.
hey, Wendy, when and I know you had a really special relationship with your dad, right?
Yeah.
So when did you lose your dad?
2019, November
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
December 2019.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Your mom is, oh my goodness, she is super special.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah.
I tell her all the time, like, how did I get so lucky? And she's like, oh, what do you mean lucky?
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's a good egg.
Yeah.
I'm curious about when you transitioned to full-time coaching.
Mhm.
And we were kind of really becoming closer at that point in time. And I know there was a struggle in that, in terms not so much of where you were, but the idea of where you would be going, like the making that leap, the
Mm-hmm.
willingness to take that risk.
Yeah.
Um, how share with us about that transition to full-time coaching.
Yeah. Um, so I just, I think over the years, and I had even when I was working a while ago in human resources, I did step out and was working part-time for an organization, and I dabbled a little bit in at the time consulting in HR. So I had a little bit that entrepreneur taste that I was like, oh, what would it be like? But then I just knew, it's not the right timing. So I had never gotten rid of that feeling, but it was becoming louder, and partly because the alignment with what I was doing and where I was at and so forth was not exactly um well, I guess there just wasn't the alignment that I, needed anymore. And so I just knew it was important for me to pay attention to that. And so and Karen and I, we met at a retreat, and we connected. And so actually, Karen, you helped me a lot in that, right? To really to my fear was, here I've been inside corporate America for so long, and I know what I'm not that I wasn't constantly challenging myself when I allowed myself to do that. But I know corporate America, right? Even in all the things we may not like about it. I knew it. And even though it's like, I know I have all these skills that I'm bringing, it was also such a leap to not be under somebody's umbrella, right? That like it was all this, pressure on me, and especially from a financial perspective, because it's not like I had this huge nest egg sitting around saying, okay, now is the time I can, I have 5 years to build this business. It wasn't like that at all. It was a huge risk. And thank God my family, my husband, my kids, like everybody and my friends and so forth, so supportive of that. But it was really did I have the ability to be able to let go of what I knew and trust myself in stepping into something that was brand new, and believe in that vision and dream that I had for myself. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, totally. Bring
Yeah.
bring bring the thread of culture through this.
Yeah.
The beginning, you mentioned culture early on, and so where you are now,
Mhm.
sitting here with really embodying healthy culture, creating the healthy culture, supporting others to create healthy culture.
Mhm.
What's Tell us about that.
Well, I think as you're talking, like I could give you the surface level answer, but it really hits in my core. When you say that, culture has always been really important to me. Like it started in family, right? Like having a healthy family unit. Thank God, I learned that from a early age, and so I held on to that through all of, the businesses, the companies, that I worked at. And I remember my dad saying to me too, like they obviously knew me pretty well. And so whenever I would be like, okay, this isn't okay or that isn't okay, and he'd be like, okay, nothing's going to be perfect, Wendy. But he also knew enough because of um that, I think, that culture piece, that he would say to me, he's like, when you start having more bad days than good days, it's time for you to make a change, right? And I was very fortunate that not always, not very often, did I have to leave an organization because of the culture. Like, that's happened. But I also knew that no matter where I went, that was going to be one of the things that I really paid attention to. And I really got pretty fortunate with that. And I think it's because I was so intentional, right? And I didn't have to take something just to take something. I was able to see the longer term. Like what is this place going to do for me, and what am I going to be able to offer to it? Um, so I'll just pause there and then have you ask another question because my
Yeah.
brain.
Yeah, no, it. I picked up immediately from the family perspective that that's where culture really started from your perspective. And as we all three talked about from the get-go, is culture starts inside of us, right? It starts here. And how we show up in our families and in our relationships and in our workplace, you had already, you knew what criteria there was that made up what healthy culture looks like, right?
Right. And I'd already had to make some really difficult decisions, professionally and at times, and then personally, and I think um for those of people who have listened or who know me, to this, I've shared my story high level about how my kids and I lost their dad to suicide into October of 2012. And I think that was another huge shift for me, is that with all that we went through, in that, and there's a much bigger story to that, but in all of that, uh, it's like, no, like life is too short for us to put ourselves in these situations where we're not taking care of ourselves mentally, physically, and emotionally, or taking care of other people. And it really comes back, the word that comes so simply is kindness, right? I know, Karen, you especially know that, like that, before my dad passed, um, he said to us, so in when my dad went into the hospital, he wasn't long before he had to be intubated. And so, thank goodness, before he did, there were a couple of things that he could say to us. And one of those things before they intubated him was, he said, um, if you remember anything at all, if you remember anything at all, remember to always be kind. And it sounds so simple. And I just, I think that's why I'm so passionate about that, and, how we treat each other, because it sounds so simple, but it doesn't happen enough. And even in that, and you know, I share this story when I talk about that, that I don't, he didn't, that doesn't just mean with each other or other people, it means with ourselves. And going back to what you were saying, Karen, about, even our podcasting culture is an inside job, and Scott, I know your heart is so much here too. It's like, that is a huge piece of that, right? How can we be kind to ourselves? And so I think, going back to my story and why I've made the choices to work or not work, places that I'm at, it's because that is like deep within my roots. And I can only go, like, you know me well, like I'm pretty even keel, like until I'm not. and it's like when that boundary is crossed, then, um, I feel like I have a responsibility to do something about that.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, so I think
Yeah.
that's part of the deeper story. Thanks.
Well,
What? Go
I think
ahead, Scott.
I think that's beautiful about your dad too. So
Yeah.
thanks for sharing that. I think one of the things too that's really interesting. So if you had to go back, I've talked to a lot of people that have stepped out of a career into coaching, and I probably talked to more that have not made it than I have those that have made it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could go back and you could grab Wendy by the shoulders
Mm,
and you could give Wendy advice,
yeah.
like what advice would you give Wendy in saying, "Hey, I'm gonna step out and we're gonna try this"? Because I remember talking to you early on about that. So what advice would you give yourself early on?
I would say, trust yourself, trust your intuition, and remember that you ain't new at this, right? You have years and years of personal and professional experience and stories, life experiences that you bring to the table. And just because you're starting out new as far as starting a business, make sure that you remember that, remember who you are and whose you are, and and just trust and put one foot in front of the other instead of beating yourself up all the time about maybe what you don't have, or maybe you're not smart enough, or right, all of those things.
You know what's interesting? You said this too. Like in the good book, it teaches us what to love our neighbors as ourselves. But that's not the first commandment. The first commandment is to love him.
Mm-hmm.
So if I love money, stuff, um, and then that's the way I'm gonna love others, like good freaking luck.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
have to take that mindset, and you said that who, like
Mm-hmm.
you are his, right? And then if I understand that love, and then that comes inside of me and self-love, because I've never seen you mad. I'm sure at McGowan Brave, I'm sure I made you mad. You were just
You saw
super
me
nice
mad.
about it.
You saw me mad one time, but we'll talk about that later.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
we'll talk about that later. Yeah.
But you're kind of like, I don't know, like I ride a unicorn every day. And I kind of like the unicorn I ride. I just kind of like it. And, to be you're always optimistic. You're not a skeptic. Um, you see the best in other people. I see you look at people and you see the best in them. And you're just, I mean, as far as, a mother and what you went through with your husband, I mean, you're brave. You're just a really brave person.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. And I will allow myself to accept that. Thank you, being brave. That's not easy for me to, allow myself to take compliments and so forth. One thing that I'll say though is that, and I've learned so much about myself, is that while I am an optimistic person, I do just very easily, typically, right, see the goodness in people, and I love people so fast, sometimes to the detriment. Um, uh, but talking about like my own inner critic, like that's the part that people don't see, right? And just like we all have our stuff. And that is, what I want to just keep coming back to and growing and continuing to um allow myself to believe in myself more, because that's going back to what I was talking about, a part of our responsibility. And I just hope that for everyone, like, believe in yourself and know that you are more than enough. Yeah.
What does that critic say the most? Which critic's the loudest?
Yeah. Um, a big one is I'm not smart enough. Like, you're not smart enough, right? And part of that comes again, from as amazing as my dad was, comes from my dad. Not that he said that to me, but because he was so smart and like he was really smart and good with his finances and just he's the type of guy like he knew a little bit about everything. I'm not even kidding. He's the type of guy I could say we would at the dinner table, Dad, what's 325 times 623, right? And he'd be like, blah, 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 this, right? And so I compared myself because I looked up to him so much. I compared myself to him. And and because finances and so forth, money were so important to him, he was really good in like telling us, right? And us watching him do it. He wasn't the greatest teacher. And so and so yeah, that inner critic just continued to grow, I think, as far as, I'm not smart enough, right? In order to be financially free, I have to be smart. Well, I'm not smart enough. I'm not that, I'm slow in math. I'm just like, all these things. So just keep telling myself. That's probably one of the louder ones.
No, that's thanks for being super honest about that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I kind of want to shift gears here a little bit and see if we were to give our audience some really good information here around if we could support them on creating a healthy culture
Mhm.
to lean into what do you see would be what would make a healthy culture, and how do we help our leaders to build that and develop that? And obviously here with Scott's help, because he's done this,
Mhm.
right? From the inside out.
I so I'm gonna go like there are so many things I could say as far as tools and skills and all of these things, but the place I'm gonna go is to what something else I'm very passionate about in my work, which I call space and grace. And I really believe so. The whole concept of space and grace and where it came from is first of all because I needed it. And so I call those God downloads, right? So a handful of years ago, that just kept coming up for me, like space and grace. So first of all, me allowing that because I'm a mover and groover. I'm doing all the time. And so I just had this message that yes, while that's not going to change, I'm not going to change being the Energizer Bunny. But where am I not allowing myself to give myself space to be able to have a deeper level of self-awareness around how I'm showing up in the world, how I want to show up in the world, giving myself space to just think, to get some of those downloads, right, as far as what I'm called to do and who I'm called to be. And then grace, right? Like it is about progress, not perfection. And so actually there's an acronym that I created. It's so complicated. It's stop. I'm like, I come up with such, creative things. But anyway, so the S stands for self-care. And by that, I also mean self-love. And so what is it that we can do for ourselves to make sure we care about ourselves and love ourselves? Because we can't do that. Like if we don't do that, we can't take care of anybody else. And as a leader, speaking of culture, that's another reason why this is so important. The T stands for think about your thinking. So, especially with what Karen and I do as coaches, we're constantly challenging people's thinking and their perspectives. And so, as leaders, and, again, in order to build a strong culture, we have to do that internally first. And so, what are our thoughts and getting real with that? Because when we remember that our thoughts lead to our emotions, that lead to our actions, that lead to our results, right? That helps us to see how that thinking matters and challenging that. The O stands for oasis. And in oasis, I mean, where is it that you find peace? We all have that different place. And we, again, as leaders, we do not do that enough. We feel guilty for it. We feel like we don't have time for it. And I've just discovered for me as an example, like nature is so super important to me. And I still don't put myself out there as much as I want to, but I can feel the difference within me when I do. And when I've worked with my clients around that and they are talking about some of those places that they put themselves in and they can find that place of peace, I'm coaching them around, well, how do you get more of that? right? Instead of beating yourself up about it. And then the P stands for progress over perfection. So, again, most of us are always in this place of, I got to do it right. I have to have all the answers. Why don't I have that now, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really just reminding that, it is truly about the journey and progress, not about perfection, because that doesn't truly exist. So I think that's what I'd come back to instead of all the things we need to do. I think it's like, how do we stop and how do we allow ourselves space and grace in order to show up as the way we want to, so we can then encourage others to do that.
I absolutely love this. And so it's an analogy here that is pretty relevant is if you look at your favorite sports team and you think about what they're doing on Monday morning, they're looking at film from the week before. They're analyzing the team that's getting ready to play, they're going to play next week. And so we as organizations don't do that well enough,
Yeah.
right? And so that's stopping, slowing down, giving yourself the space to reflect, get the data, to understand how do we tweak, what needs to be pivot, how do we pivot, what's different, what needs to be different, all those micro decisions to allow us to move more agilely and more resiliently because we've taken the time to have the data. We can speed up in the curve, which allows us to move forward and progress, like you say, because oftentimes we're not slowing down enough. And what happens then, of course, as we know, is we keep going and we keep going and the wheels aren't tight. And now we've lost one and now we're, like train wreck. So how do we help organizations understand the importance of stop, of slowing down, giving yourself space and grace, recognizing the reflection opportunity to get the data so that we can do these smaller tweaks and pivot as we need to?
Yeah,
Yes.
I love that, Karen. And Scott, you and Karen, we know that we've all heard this, and both personally and professionally, that, if people hear messages like this, or somebody invites them to do something to slow down, right? They're like, I don't have time to do that.
Right.
And what I have literally been saying to people, including myself, is you don't have time not
Yeah.
to.
Right. What is it costing you not to? Right.
Yeah.
What's the future cost?
And
Exactly.
so I think it is like just inviting people to reflect on that. It's like understanding that you don't have time not to, because what is the impact of it and what is
Mm.
it costing you by not? Um, and we know too, right? When we coach with people or have you, they're always like, okay, that's great. Now how do I fix it? Or sometimes you just got to sit in it,
Mhm. Yeah.
and realize, gosh, how is this impacting my life? And again, for me, it's not how I'm wired. I'm not wired to stop. I'm not wired to slow
Yeah.
down. And so it is a journey. And so I'm constantly reminding myself of that. And when I
Yeah.
talk to friends or whatever, and they're like, know about space and grace, because I have retreats on it, they're like, space and grace, Wendy, space and
Mhm.
grace. I'm like, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Have
So
you ever been to a dog track?
yes.
So they chase something called Sparky.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a long time to figure this out in life, but they never catch them ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when we realize that if pace is our drug of choice, it just does not end well. But it feels really good
Mhm.
because, I'm getting stuff done it is my drug of choice.
Mhm.
So today, for example, it is 1:41. I'm telling you, first time in my life, I have not turned on a TV the entire day.
That's a big deal.
It is a
Mhm.
big deal because I
Mhm.
was outside with my wife and she's like, she said, I saw you look at the TV and you're like, why haven't you turned like the Today Show on?
Yeah.
And I said, okay, I'm going to try it. I'll see if I can get through it. And, I don't know, but gosh, sometimes, and you're right, Wendy, we just have to give ourselves some room to say, and I'm so bad at this. It's got to be my worst trait that it's okay to sit back and do nothing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and I love that. And what I wrote down as you were talking, and Karen, this is based on what you were saying too, and we talk to our clients about this too, and myself, is it's like that comparison between doing and being.
Mhm.
And so instead of, and maybe this is another, opportunity, right? Instead of what do you need to do, it's like, how do you need to be? Right. And sometimes that is just sitting. It might be journaling, it might be walking. So it's not like you have to be completely stationary, but it's like, what is it that's going to allow you to just feel the feelings and think the thoughts, which is why we don't,
Yeah.
because we're afraid of it.
It's
And me too,
uncomfortable.
right?
It's
With everything,
uncomfortable.
all of us have a story. And so it's not that we're doing it saying, well, I'm going to do this so I don't think about this, but it becomes our operating system.
Yeah.
Right.
The other thing that I've
This,
just
oh,
recently come across, sorry, Scott, would be when we keep it inside of us, right? Those thoughts and the feelings, it's only able to be viewed subjectively. And what I've learned is how when we can put that outside of us, like you say, either journaling or recording it or somehow or another getting it out of us, we can now start to be more objective with it
Mm-hmm.
and discern where is there fear, judgment, what's holding me back, what's the truth of this, what worked, what didn't. That's again that piece of the importance of reflection, so we get the data, because now we can know what's different, about what would need to be different. But keeping it inside of us, we're shallowing, our ego perspective is only subjective.
Yeah.
So balancing that ability to get it outside of us, have somebody else look at it. Hey, what do you see in this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Guaranteed somebody else might see a different perspective of it, right? So how true is it? My way isn't the only way. So yeah, just really taking that time. It's so valuable, so critical, and so uncomfortable.
And I think that's a really huge, important piece of leadership too, and culture is vulnerability.
Oh,
Right?
totally.
And it looks different for all of us, right?
Yeah.
But just keep leaning into that.
So
well,
if
and I
we
think you said something too in regards to like, like silence. That's where shame grows. That's where comparison grows. And when we say something, it gets it gets out of this noggin and spins around. And I believe it goes, maybe it has to come through our heart, right, before it comes out of our mouth. And it's like, is that so? Then all of a sudden we get reflection. Like, is that true? Most of the time, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's a warped sense of truth. And when we say something, then it's not silent, and then we lose, like, it loses all its power.
Yeah.
Um, and you're exactly right about, I think as a leader too, you have to ask yourself, like, would you follow yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And if you would, why? Which I think most people would say, I don't know. Well, just get super honest why you wouldn't.
Yeah.
And it's very likely why maybe some people aren't following you. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
Mhm.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So Wendy, bring us inside and wrap this up for us. What might our audience, what's a great question that we would help them go inside with?
Gosh, I think, just simply how are you going to allow yourself more space and grace? And when you do, what's the impact of it? And just allowing yourself to sit with that. I think that's it.
I
Yeah.
love that.
Thank you.
I've been doing it myself, so I can definitely see the benefit.
Good. I love that. I love that. I think that too, right? Just in that is like, that's the importance of, I think, having an accountability person in your life or accountability people. It's like when we can be vulnerable and sharing out loud, like what we're trying, what we're changing, what we're, we can come back to supporting each other in that. Because otherwise this world can be a really lonely place. It's hard enough.
Mhm.
So I think that's the other thing I'd offer is as people are allowing themselves that is who is it that you can bring into that space with you and realize that, you're not alone in that.
So, as a coach for our audience, how
Mhm.
can they get in touch with you if they needed an accountability partner?
Ooh. Yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn, Wendy Roop Coaching, and then Instagram is Wendy Roop Coaching. Um, and Wendy Roop Coaching at gmail.com is my email. anything else I'm missing? You know, I'm not great with the whole
Yeah, that's
social media. I think
we
I
don't
know.
do that often enough, do we? But
Oh,
that's it. That's great. Identifying your email address is perfect. And you can always find us in our show notes and so forth where there are other connections.
yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think if you're interested in coaching, I see this like, it's like cleaning your garage. And there are times when you clean your garage and you maybe, if you have a storage cabinet, that's where everything goes that you don't want to see, right? And if you're really good at cleaning your garage, you might even get the hose out and clean it. But I think a really good coach helps you drag every ounce of stuff out of that garage. And then before you put it back in, you got to have a conversation. Like, when's the last time you used this? It's like, oh, I don't want to talk about that.
Purge.
Yeah, like the massive purge. But if you ever clean your garage out or your trunk out or done something just incredible, and when you're finished, it just feels so good and so freeing. And then you have so much space. You're like, and because I've done it before where I've actually cleaned, then I've gone back and I've just like admired it. Like, this is awesome. Now I'm kind of crazy. But I do think that what both Karen and what you do for people is just beautiful. Because really what you do is you just bring about their potential it's always been there. It's
Yeah.
always been there.
Helping him, there's clarity, right? I mean, just even in the reflections that I've done in the last few weeks that I've been taking that space and grace, I come out of that. And one of the questions I say is, how do I feel now? And immediately feel lighter and clearer about what's next. So yeah, it's transformational.
I love that. And I do think, right, what is the multiple, right? But what are some of the gifts of coaching and having a coach is having that space, but having the safe space with no
Yeah,
judgment,
that's right.
right? Instead of someone coming out and judging your garage.
Your garage is a mess.
Yeah.
God, time to clean your
I
garage.
know. I
No,
know.
yeah,
Yeah,
thanks for holding the space for me today.
absolutely. Thank you for being so vulnerable.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us on Cultures and Inside Job. Looking forward to next time. And Wendy, I think we'll probably unpack a few more things about you the next time we're together.
Mhm.
Sounds
So to all the listeners, have a great day.
awesome. See ya.
Bye.